Well, good evening. My name is Andrea Chambers. I'm the director of the Center for Publishing at New York University, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to the latest in the NYU Media Talk series, Native News, Native Now, the Changing Face of Digital Content. It's great to see so many of our Master of Science in Publishing students here this evening, as well as our Summer Publishing Institute class of 2014. I'd like to acknowledge as well our alumni from both programs, members of our faculty, our advisory board, guest speakers, and all of our friends and our colleagues in the publishing community. And now I'd like to pay a very special welcome to our moderator this evening, to Jessie Hempel. Jessie is a senior writer at Fortune magazine. She is co-chair of the magazine's annual Brain Crunch Technology Conference, and she is a member of our Master of Science in Publishing, Digital and Print Media faculty. She teaches a course in the spring, an advanced digital seminar in Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. So, Jessie, a warm welcome. And now I would like to introduce to you our distinguished panelists. We have with us this evening Andrew Fitzgerald of Twitter News. We have Dan Roth, the executive editor of LinkedIn. We have Shani Hilton. Shani is the deputy editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed. And we have Jim Roberts. Jim is the executive editor and chief content officer of Mashable. So, just saying those names, Twitter, LinkedIn, BuzzFeed, and Mashable, let you know we're going to have an exciting conversation here this evening. These companies really are in the forefront of digital news and technology, and as many of you have attended our media talks know that they are public forums on important issues facing the media today. So for this, our 15th media talk, we wanted to focus on a trend that is really changing the way all of us access and share content. Digital media companies are fast transforming the way we get our information, and they're fast transforming themselves. Who remembers when Twitter was just a way to share your personal, intimate information in 140 characters or less? Well, I do. LinkedIn was initially only a site about showcasing and sharing your professional profile. BuzzFeed was about listicles and, well, cats. And Mashable started out as a simple blog launched from the Aberdeen, Scotland home of its founder, Peter Cashmore. And now look at these companies. They are the new influencers. They are the new chroniclers of how we get news, not only information, but information in all forms and formats. And that's what we're going to be talking about here this evening. Now, I know you're eager to learn more from our panelists and get going with the panel tonight, but I know that some of our alumni and visitors want to hear just a few words about what's going on at the Center for Publishing this summer. At SPI, the Summer Publishing Institute, which began last week and runs through July 11th, we have 120 students from all over the country and all over the world, and 190 guest speakers. Now, in the magazine session, which is currently underway, just to name a few of the speakers, we have editors-in-chief of Esquire, Condé Nast Traveler, In Style, Men's Health, the Food Network magazine, the Paris Review, and yes, even that very hot new magazine, American Farmer. We have leading publishers including Michael Clinton from Hearst, Chris Guilfoyle of Meredith, Donna Lagani of Cosmopolitan, and many more. I'd like to pay a very special thank you to Victoria Von Beal, our magazine director, who has done an extraordinary job of putting together the program this summer. Now, in the book session, which begins the week after next, thanks to our terrific book director, Libby Jordan, we have a similarly stellar group of speakers. This year in the book session, the keynote address will be given by Brian Murray, the Chief Executive Officer of HarperCollins, and he will be followed by other publishing executives, including Madeline McIntosh, the COO of Penguin Random House, Reagan Arthur of Little Brown, David Levithan of Scholastic, Jamie Rabb of Grand Central, and more. And of course, in both sessions, we have a full schedule of visits to media companies, book, magazine, and digital. It's quite a summer, and I would like to pay special thanks to Jennifer Goodwin, our resident SBI Assistant Director, for all of her hard work on the program. Jennifer? Now, elsewhere in the Center for Publishing, our graduate program continues to grow with 36 new faculty members and 11 new courses in the last 18 months, as well as an expanded digital curriculum and a strong schedule of industry visits and events. And we're getting more and more global in this program. We took students to London a few months ago to volunteer at the London International Book Fair. We'll be going back to Frankfurt for the third time in the fall to the Frankfurt International Book Fair. And we will be going to Sharjah in the Middle East and the United Arab Emirates in November to volunteer at their book fair. And we find that these international volunteer opportunities are a great way for our students to really understand the complexities of global media. I also want to mention to you a new program that will be starting in early 2015. We're creating an executive education program. It's called the NYU Advanced Digital Publishing Institute. It's online only. It's for mid to senior level publishing executives. We're going to start off with a focus on digital books, looking at subjects like discoverability, advanced social media marketing, transformative business models, and so forth. Now, for more information about this new program or all of our programs, we have brochures at the side of the room, or catch me at the afterwards at the reception. So now it's time to focus on the topic of the evening, Native News, Native Now. We will have time for a Q&A session at the end of the evening, so please have some great questions ready. We'll have mics in the aisle, and we'll ask you to come and line up. We do want to hear your thoughts about the evening. The hashtag is NYU Media Talk, so feel free to share your thoughts at any time. We will have a reception after the panel discussion with great food and wine, so please be sure to stay for that. So now, everybody, it's time to turn the conversation over to Jessie Hempel and to our panelists.
Thank you, Andrea. Good evening, everybody. So I'm Jessie Hempel. I am a long-form magazine writer at Fortune magazine, which may be one of the oldest types of media jobs that exist. A lot has changed in media since I graduated from graduate school in 2003. It is a whole new business. And as you all begin to think about your careers and begin to move into this field, the conversation we're going to have tonight represents the best of the opportunities that will be available to you. I know a lot of you guys are thinking about starting your own digital media companies, going to work at these companies, or working at companies that will learn from what they're doing and compete with them. So with that, I want to introduce you to our panelists, and I want, in doing so, to ask each of them to explain what it is they do and how they got to where they are. And Jim, since you told me you could do it in a minute and a half, I'll start with you.
Okay. All right. So I was in your chair in 1977, I guess it was. That's when I started in the news business. I wanted to be in the news business because it seemed exciting. I actually remember very vividly being an intern the year before and being handed a thing that it was as big as a suitcase. It was our first digital device, and it weighed about 40 pounds. And I used it a couple of times and felt like my arm was going to fall off. I was in the print world for quite a while, worked at the New York Times for 26 years. The last 7 or so of them in the digital sphere. In that time, I grew incredibly excited about the potential for digital media in terms of that excitement that drew me to journalism in the first place. It truly was and is the most exciting way to participate in communicating with people. I spent a brief period at Reuters after the New York Times. I've been at Mashable since late November, and I'm having a blast trying to figure out what's next.
And we're going to talk a lot about that. But let's jump over to Dan. Dan, you're at LinkedIn. Is that where you thought you would be at this point in your career?
No, I can't say that there was. I mean, considering that LinkedIn wasn't around for most of my career, that wasn't really on my radar. I was, like Jessie, a long-form magazine writer for most of my career. Was a writer and editor at Fortune, Forbes, Wired, helped start a magazine at Condé Nast called Portfolio, and then was the editor of Fortune.com before going to LinkedIn about almost 3 years ago. And for me, the biggest change was, number one, realizing that the media, that if I stayed in the magazine business doing what I was doing, there would be fewer and fewer places for me to go. And second, that all of my consumption of media was online. And why wasn't I where I was actually consuming the media? And at LinkedIn, it was a chance, to wrap it up, at Fortune, what I realized was that we were increasingly playing in a technology game. We needed the engineers to be smarter and faster and better. And that's how we were reaching our readers. And trying to figure that out at a media company was difficult. LinkedIn at the time was thinking about getting into content. And the idea of going to a tech company that was trying to figure out media I thought had enormous potential, and that I could learn a lot from these folks, and they could learn from me, and that's what's been going on.
Thank you. Shani, where did you start your career?
At the Etiwanda Intermediate School newsletter, the Paw Print. I was a founding editor at the age of 13.
Age 13?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I stayed in journalism through middle school and and into high school and into college. And I was an editor at my school paper at Howard University. And by the time I graduated from college, I was sick of journalism. And so I spent 4 years working in PR at Princeton University. And around year 4, I'd become the social media editor for Princeton and realized I was sick of that too, and I really wanted to get back to writing. So I started blogging kind of on my free time and wrote some articles for the American Prospect, RIP. And
Indeed, RIP.
and then I ended up back in DC and worked at Washington City Paper, and I worked at NBC Local, and I did a good stint in local news, which was really fun, and I learned a lot. And then somehow I wound up at BuzzFeed.
It's the somehow I wound up that I'm interested in exploring, Shani.
It was kind of a whirlwind. I mean, BuzzFeed was hiring a culture editor, and that was what I was looking to do. I was kind of interested in getting out of local news and didn't want to do politics. And didn't really see what I could do in DC. So I thought, okay, let me just look for something in New York, maybe, and I got introduced to an editor there, and then I started working as the manager kind of the culture teams and editing the culture teams, and somehow my newsroom, my very traditional newsroom experience lent itself to me becoming a manager in the newsroom, on the news side of things and moving away from culture.
So we're going to explore what that means at BuzzFeed, but I do not want to leave Andrew out. Andrew, you're working at Twitter. That wouldn't be first on my list of naturals for a media company. How did you start your career?
So I was a journalist before I joined Twitter, but I got my start in a strange way. I also got sick of journalism.
By middle school or?
It was high school.
Yeah.
It was right at the end of high school. No, I went to film school, and at film school was sort of I went to USC. USC is very good at setting you up to go into the film industry, which means that you're going to join a guild and do all of the pieces of filmmaking, and everybody who goes to film school doesn't want to do that. They want to make movies all their own. They want to be like an auteur. That's the word that they teach you your first year, and it plagues you from every year that follows. And so I discovered sort of guerrilla documentary filmmaking. And this was at the time when sort of new digital video tools were becoming more prevalent. And so I found my way back into journalism as a documentary producer, which led to working for a couple of different television networks. And along the way, one of the television networks I was working for was called Current TV, RIP. And
a lot of RIP on this
stage. RIP. I think we're gonna have a lot of that tonight. So Current TV was focused on citizen journalism and user-generated content, and I had this experience at Current where around Hurricane Katrina, I went down as a producer and actually shot footage in New Orleans, right after the storm, and it was probably some of the best work I'd ever produced, and I was so incredibly proud of it. And at the same time, I was working with citizen journalists who lived down there, who told their own stories, shot them terribly, but their stories were so much better. They turned the cameras around on themselves, and they told these absolutely authentic and powerful stories that I wouldn't have been able to tell that story. And that was sort of a revelatory moment for me. And so most of my career has been since focused on citizen journalism and weaving citizen journalism into how we tell stories in the news.
And how did you get to Twitter?
So I realized another revelation along the way was that we were at Current TV. We were trying to convince people to tell these stories, going around the world, hey, maybe you should make video content just for us, not for anyone else, just for us. And turns out people were just doing that on their own. They were uploading it to YouTube, and importantly, they were sharing news to Twitter in real time. And I became really focused on how do you, as a journalist, find that content and pull it out. And so a couple of jobs later, I started talking with Twitter about helping the whole of the industry figure out techniques to do that. And so that's my role now.
And do you consider Twitter to be a media company?
I would no. Twitter does not produce content. Twitter doesn't really edit content. We like to say Twitter is the pipes. It's the platform. And so for me, my role is to be a media guy inside of a technology company to help them understand this world that Twitter has become very complementary to.
So I want to draw our attention to this inherent, some would say it could be a conflict between the idea of a media company and a technology company. And as I cover digital media companies, whenever a digital media company wants a higher valuation, they will begin by convincing me, the business reporter, that they're actually a tech company. And each of you is working at a company that is both. How do you identify? You identify as a tech company. Shani, what's BuzzFeed? Media company or tech company?
Depends on who you ask. I think at BuzzFeed.
At BuzzFeed. Right, so there's internal.
Yeah, I mean, I think
confusion
it's a media company and it's a tech company. What they've created there in terms of both editorial and the technology is kind of astounding.
Is there a tension in that ever?
I don't think so. I don't find there to be a tension.
Jim, how about Mashable?
I would answer the same way. We're definitely both. And the two halves, I think, are quite complementary. The technology part of Mashable really does help us distribute our content, not just distribute it, it helps us broadcast it, spread it. That's the beauty of the people that I work with on the technology side. They are working to create better mechanisms for our content to reach an audience, and that is truly a technology mission. So it works very well together.
So Dan, you didn't go into a tech/media company. You went into a tech company and introduced media. Was there a culture clash that came with that?
I think there was a culture clash on both sides. Maybe culture clash is the wrong word. There was a learning curve on both sides. LinkedIn is definitely a technology company. 60% of our revenues come from selling software as a service to recruiters, and 20% comes from ads. So this is not a major, this is not monetized like a traditional media company. And I think that what was interesting was going there and talking about, assuming that everyone had the same focus on news that I did, and the same idea for what content was. And so you would talk to my early conversations were with engineers, and we would discuss what made good content. And when they were asking what made good content, they wanted to know about the metadata of the content. How can we understand? They would say, why is this good content for this particular industry? If we're going to serve up
Metadata.
So let me take a step back and explain. We have two kinds of content at LinkedIn. We do we try to match the right headline to the right professional at a massive scale. So if you're a real estate agent, you should be getting great content that other real estate agents are reading, or if you're an airline pilot, same kind of thing. Right. And then we also have original content, which is hundreds of thousands of people now writing, and soon it'll be everyone on LinkedIn have the ability to write long-form content that attaches to their profile. In the beginning, when we were just doing the aggregation, when the engineer said, what is this good content, they meant, is this okay to serve to somebody? Is this a relevant piece of content? So does this actually, we just served this story to an airline pilot. Was this a good story to serve him? And what they meant was it relevant? It could have been a terrible story, but they want to know just when they say metadata, did the words have to do with it, with airlines? Was this generally relevant to someone in the industry? And what I would say was, that was a terrible story. This thing made no sense, or this was an ad, or this was an advertorial. Why are we serving this up? And getting to the point where I was like, oh, they don't know to even ask the question of, is this good or not? They just want to know, did we get it right in giving it to them? So I learned a lot from that. I think they've learned a lot from that. We've gotten to the point where we talk about high quality content and we are on the same page about what that means.
So what does high quality content mean for each of you in your respective sites?
I mean, I think for BuzzFeed, it's things that people share. That's kind of the baseline of what we look at high quality content to be.
So BuzzFeed, let's talk a second about the kinds of content that BuzzFeed has a lot. Probably all of you have caught some of the cat listicles. You guys also do serious investigative reporting. Are they both quality?
Absolutely. We love them both. They're both wonderful. I mean, I think, the thing that we think about is if you're going to click on something and you're not disappointed by it, and in fact you want to share with people that you know to show that you're smart, or to show that you are emotionally moved, or to have that person feel the same thing that you feel. I mean, all of those things add up to good quality content. Well, it doesn't matter, what the actual content of the content is.
So Jim, you spent so much of your career at the New York Times, which is probably above any other institution, has a mandate to perform a public service. A service is written into the core of what it means to be a part of a democracy. You are at Mashable. Is there what can you pull from your experience at the New York Times? What transcends to the reporting that happens at Mashable, and what is specific to the Times?
Well, one of the things that I've tried to do in the short amount of time that I've been there is to help my colleagues understand that some of the bedrock principles of storytelling, of classic journalism reporting, how they can be applied to the world of digital content, shareable content. My mission there is to try to find, and I'm sure BuzzFeed is trying to do the same thing, to try to find this happy medium in the middle where you have really strong material, which can be listicles as well as long form, where you have strong material that's smart and shareable at the same time. I think that over the years that I worked at the Times, I learned certainly how to think about the best ways of conveying information. Whether it was putting together the right kinds, the right sequence of words, matching words and photos, matching words and video. Those are all applicable to the digital media as well. I think our mission, again, is to try to find the ways to make it shareable. But I've had no trouble at all, sort of for myself, making that leap and helping bring some of those lessons to my colleagues. I should also say at the same time that they've taught me a lot as well and continue to teach me a lot. Someday I will, much more be in that happy middle where I'm truly able to create that perfect, shareable, smart, informative story.
I like the way you frame that, Jim, when you say that they've taught me a lot too. When we're thinking about digital media companies, there's often still a sense that there are a lot of experiments going on, and that there's a sort of race to the bottom in terms of content. And in 2014, I think we've really moved beyond that in a lot of ways, that we've moved to a adolescent, if not mature, digital media ecosystem. And I'm curious what the lessons that we might draw from digital media companies are.
Well, one thing, I'm not sure I'm going to directly answer your question, but one of the things that I am trying to do at Mashable is to find a way that when it comes to creating the truly viral, shareable content, the stuff that, listen, we know the tricks. It's not that hard to figure out how to create a piece of content that people will want to share. But what I want to do is find the ways to sort of complete the spectrum. So you've got things that are incredibly shareable, incredibly viral, and then you've got really, really heavy, important, maybe boring, but heavy stuff over here.
Right.
And within this continuum are a lot of connections. So what I want to do in the experiments that I'm trying to undertake are, how do you take the whimsical and make it more topical, bring it closer to the conversation, I think that, again, we know how to share pictures of animals and people will go crazy about it, but how can you take those sharing techniques, apply it to more topical subjects, and then how do you take sharing techniques and apply them to really the deep, heavy material? I think those are really incredibly cool, worthwhile experiments.
Shani, have you learned anything about how to do that as BuzzFeed?
We're pretty happy being on both ends of the spectrum. In fact, we were just talking about that today. I mean, I think, it's totally fine for something at BuzzFeed to be wildly shared and something else to not be shared at all, depending on the topic. Or not shared at all, but like that the people who are supposed to read it, right? Whether it's something on, trans worker protections in administrative action, or it's, Sloth Week, or sorry, Slothsgiving, that's what we're calling it. And so, I think it's really like you can fall into a trap when you try to do the middle ground, and I think it's a worthwhile experiment trying to figure it out, but a lot of times it doesn't work.
And so what I'm hearing you say, in part, is that the audiences who are meant to find the content that you've produced will.
Yes.
And sometimes those audiences might be small for some of the content.
Yes.
And that still serves BuzzFeed?
Yeah, it does. I think, part of it is making sure people are aware that, this is something that we can produce for them, like content that, we've been doing some stuff on what's called chronic fatigue syndrome, which has a very small but very passionate audience. And so, you do a story on that, and, you get emails saying, can I translate this in German for my website? Can I, I think that's really fascinating. Kind of like if you can reach the entire mass of, even if it's a 100,000 person audience, that's really cool.
So we're talking a lot about how to reach audiences. That's your sweet spot, Twitter, when it comes to sharing content. What do you see as the most productive and maybe innovative ways that media companies are using Twitter right now?
Well, so similarly to BuzzFeed, we sort of what we think about as good content is measured by engagement, how things are shared on Twitter, how things are retweeted, replied to, favorited, and so we see a lot of different entities, and actually you mentioned experiments, which I thought was interesting. We see companies experimenting with what works for them. And that, I think, that's the next phase. And that's something that media companies can take out of technology companies. Technology companies are always experimenting. If you are not experimenting with like new stuff rapidly, publicly to millions of people, which can look kind of messy to the external world, but for engineers, that's exactly what you want. You want to like rapidly iterate experiments to millions of people, gather as much data as possible so that you can kill the stuff that doesn't work and ship the stuff that does. And I actually think that that's the most exciting area for media right now, is to take that learning of rapid experimentation and iteration and build, learn what works for your media property.
Dan, how does that resonate with you?
Well, we come at it from a slightly different aspect, but before that, I want to just add one thing to the earlier conversation, which is that there was when you think about finding the right audience, I know that Digiday did a piece where they asked about how you pay journalists, whether as a media company you should pay journalists based on page views or likes and shares or whatever. What are the right metrics? And Ben Smith from BuzzFeed said something interesting, which is that he doesn't believe in that because every piece of content has its own audience and has its own almost lifetime value. And so you don't want to just say, well, if something goes viral, then it's high quality and this is great and this is what if you optimize for that, you'll end up with a really crappy site that is just shareable stuff that people like briefly, but it's like eating candy. Your teeth rot after a little while and you stop going to it. And so you want to have you want to be able to offer everything. I think at LinkedIn, one of the things that we play in a lot of different areas. One is that people can share content on LinkedIn, so there are all kinds of people sharing really topics that are really important to them. But increasingly they're writing their own content. And you're seeing, beyond just, you start to see people really put their heart and soul into writing something in a way that only journalists could. For a while, we were the only ones that had the keys to the kingdom and we could do the writing. And now people are writing, and they're writing about areas that they are really passionate about. Like there was a post yesterday from someone writing about how to evaluate how to write an RFP, a request for proposal, if you're buying shopping carts for your grocery store. It was, I don't know, 1,000 words. It was really in-depth. This person was obsessed with the idea of how you write these RFPs. It's so boring. I mean, who cares about that? But this was what she cares about in her audience. And you look at the comments, and these are people saying, oh, yeah, thank you. That was a great point. I never thought about wire quality before, blah, blah. Someone else, this guy who was a butler, wrote about what it's like being a modern butler. And these people are all finding their audiences, and it's exactly who they are. They are doing it because it goes right to their network. They've already built these networks. It's almost like the way we used to build readerships and subscribers. They already have all their subscribers, and they write pieces that are just for them. And in these niches, they might only get 5,000 views, but it is the right 5,000 views, and they're thrilled with it.
So Dan, you began your comment by saying, by asking the question of, how are journalists paid, or raising that as a question. You don't pay your influencers, right?
That's right.
So how do you incentivize? How do you build a network and incentivize people to create that content, which takes time to create? What's in it for them?
So the influencer program is something that we have where we have 500 top thought leaders writing original content on LinkedIn. It's folks like the president of it's everyone from Angela Ahrendts, who's now the head of retail at Apple, to Jim Kim, the president of the World Bank, Ban Ki-moon. These folks, we couldn't pay them enough to write for us. We're not going to have a word, Jeff Immelt, the CEO of GE, is not going to be incentivized to write at $2 a word. Richard Branson doesn't care. We can't pay him enough to do it. They do it because they can't reach the kind of audience. We have built them an audience. A lot of these people have gone through the whole cycle of building intranets, and they have their own microsites, and they put their blog posts up there, and no one ever reads them. And so we say to them, why are you doing that? Why are you trying to? This whole idea of if you build it, they will come is false. People are already on LinkedIn. They're already on Twitter. Why don't you build your media presence here, where the people already are, and they'll read it and they'll comment on it. And so they do it for that. So so we can't. What we pay them with is numbers of people reading it, and the fact these are real people. There's no anonymity on LinkedIn.
Right.
So when people read the post and they write a comment, and on average, every influencer post gets 100 comments, which is, when I was at Fortune, if we had 5, we were pretty excited. And
now we're up to 7, Dan.
what's that? This is the old days. This was like 3 years ago. So it's much better now with me gone.
Now it's time to ban comments, really.
What's that?
It's time to ban comments.
It's time to ban comments?
Yeah.
Oh, I love comments. Our comments are great because there's no anonymity, and people write, and when they write, their entire network sees it. So it's a totally different experience. So when someone writes a comment, they're writing for their own network, and their boss sees it, their employees see it, their future business partners see it. It's part of their permanent record. So we have a totally different setup than most places do.
Okay, so that's how writing is incentivized at LinkedIn. I mean, how do you guys staff your sites?
In a fairly traditional way. I mean, for what we call Buzz Team, and that's the group of people who make the lists and the cat gifs and all the fun stuff, the entertainment for the site. They have a fellowship program that's basically a 3-month paid internship, and that's how they hire most people for Buzz Team now, and it's pretty competitive at this point. And in terms of our news side, that's traditional hiring, recruiting, poaching, etc.
So what happens to your interns after they have that job? You come in for a 3-month paid internship. What do you aspire to do?
You aspire for a spot on Buzz Team, assuming you're not going back to college.
Got it.
At which point, if you're graduating and you're prepared to work, and you're good, and you've really met the metrics set by this pretty intensive program, you have a job at BuzzFeed, and you work as you make whatever. I mean, you can make lists, you can make quizzes. Some people dip into news, breaking news. It's really grown as a program. So there's a lot of, and there's an expectation that they're going to do a lot of experimentation on the site.
Jim, how do you staff Mashable?
Same way. I mean, our staff is smaller, but it is a very traditional structure. We also have an internship program, and I mean, it sounds almost exactly the same. They're there for 3 months, and it is something of an evaluation. They look at us, we look at them. Every group, we basically bring in about, I guess, 25 paid interns every 3 months. And the last group, I'm pretty sure we hired 3, 4, 5 of them, and I think hopefully we'll be looking to do at least a couple the next go around. But virtually all of our content is produced by paid staff. We do have. I'd actually like to have a handful of contributors, but right now we feel like what we want to do, the mission we are trying to accomplish, really is best done with our own team, with a team that that understands what we're trying to do, a team that we know. It has worked well, and I expect it to continue to work well.
So what have we learned about good business models for digital media? What works? I mean, we see a lot of advertorial right now. We see a lot of people building out contributors networks that are often modeled after what Dan has built at LinkedIn. Can we definitively say this works?
I think we can say that some things work now. I can't say that they're going to work tomorrow. I mean, our site right now consists of a lot of traditional advertising that pays a lot of the bills. Will it continue in the same way that it has? I can pray that it does, but I couldn't guarantee it. And I think that any media organization that thinks about, that relies on one stream of funding is doomed to disappointment, if not abject failure. Working at the Times, the truly great thing that they did 3 or 4 years ago, was decide to build a paywall, which I will admit I objected to at the time for any number of reasons. But yet, what it has done is created, a different dedicated stream of revenue that insulates them, at least to some degree, from economic shocks that will impact the advertising market. But for us, it is it's a combination of traditional advertising. We do some sponsored content. We also do some events. And again, it's working today. Hopefully, it'll work tomorrow, but there's no guarantee.
And do any of the rest of you do events?
I don't actually know. There's such a wall
good
between
answer.
business and editorial and BuzzFeed that I am not completely aware of that.
Wow. What kind of media team does Twitter have, and how significant is it to what Twitter's doing?
So we, the way that Twitter thinks about media is complementary to media companies. So instead of sort of, saying that Twitter will be a replacement for traditional media, the idea is that Twitter is actually a powerful tool to help media companies of all stripes amplify the work that they're doing, engage with their audience in real time. So our media team is primarily focused on partnerships between Twitter and those companies. We have a handful of different areas outside of news. So we have news and entertainment television. Twitter is great with TV, sports, music, government and politics, actually. We have one person dedicated to faith and nonprofits. She met the Pope. That was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
And largely what our team does is we don't sell ads. We go in and try to help different media organizations be successful on Twitter. So when a news organization is successful on Twitter, that helps them drive more traffic, build a bigger audience, and it's good for Twitter because they are putting awesome news content into the platform.
So
I was just going to jump in. I think that there's obviously a direct connection between what Andrew was saying and what I'm saying too, and that is, the business model at Mashable, and I'm certain this is the case at BuzzFeed too, does rely to a large extent on these other platforms. Andrew mentioned a while ago that Twitter was indeed a platform, and I think for us and many other publishers, that is a lifeline to us. I think some of the more traditional publishers, certainly the Times, has not quite taken advantage of these in the way that I think they could, and the way they may have to. Yeah, there's a phrase, I didn't coin this, I heard from somebody at ESPN, fish where the fish are, which is, think about it, it does make sense. You need to reach people and you need to put your content to their, into the world that they live in. And if it's on Twitter or if it's on Facebook, that's where you need to be. And so while we have a traditional website, we have traditional apps, so much of our thinking is about how to make sure that our content performs as best as possibly can on these other platforms. And I really do think that more of the mainstream publishers are going to have to start paying greater attention to that.
Let's talk about the audiences a second that you're serving. Jim, I really like that framework of the spectrum that you laid out. Content that was sort of light and frivolous on one side, the meat and potatoes on the other. Let's insert the audience. How do you know what your audience even wants? And how important is it that you give them what they want versus what you as a brand and a company think they need? And let's start with Dan.
It's easier for us than it is for a lot of people because everyone tells us who they are on LinkedIn. They've given us all this data that say, this is where I've worked, this is where I work now, here's what my network looks like, here's my real name, here are my skills that I'm interested in. So we have this massive amount of data, and we can pretty reasonably serve them content. And so we have an editorial and algorithmic approach to serving up content, where the editors actually work with the algorithms. We give feedback. When the editors make some decision about what content goes somewhere else, the algorithm learns how that works. But then we also have the algorithms also serving up its own content that someone else has written. The algorithm doesn't write content yet. So
the algorithm is watching editors serve up stories to various people.
One of the interesting parts is realizing that you are always helping make your job, you're always helping a machine take away part of your job. And getting used to, getting comfortable with that idea is something that everyone in this room should probably get comfortable with. There's this idea that you're always training your replacement. That was true no matter, even before the algorithms were involved. But now it's happening at a quicker pace.
And that replacement is a computer and not a person.
That's right. So a lot of what we do is help train the algorithm to understand what kind of content we think that is high quality content that certain people will like, so that certain audiences will like. Now, what happens is we're frequently wrong. And we can see what the click-through rate is versus something that we gave to an audience versus what the algorithm did. And you get used to that, and you learn from that as well. But there is still some level of saying, this is a really important story, we're going to serve it up, or we think that you should write it even if it doesn't get a high click-through rate. Mm-hmm. That this is important if you get the 5 right people reading this, and it goes back to the earlier statement about finding the right audience for a piece of content. You don't know, size doesn't necessarily determine what is the right audience. Click-through rate is not always the best metric. Right. And so for us, it is finding something that people will react to, that they'll write pieces about, that they'll comment on, that they'll share with their networks. And you just look for something that shows that there was engagement around it. I mean, engagement is this kind of word that's thrown around a lot, but I think it's incredibly important. If there's engagement around a topic, and engagement is beyond just clicking on a link-bait headline and is actually participating and adding back to the conversation, then then you've won with that audience.
Do you know how much of a story somebody has read once they open the story and read it?
We do know that. And I think that probably all of us, anyone who uses, there are great tools out there that tell you that. Yeah.
So, Shani, what do you know about your audience?
Well, the thing to keep in mind for BuzzFeed specifically is that it was quite literally founded to discover what people want. In 2006 now, when Jonah Peretti used it as a lab, and I think some of you may have read this thing that was on Medium today, an interview with him that was pretty interesting even to me. The point of BuzzFeed early on was to figure out what was trending, and then share those things with the audience, and kind of like replicate that. And then then it became a point where it's like, well, can we create things that the audience will share? And so now we have a pretty good idea of what our audience wants. So,
right.
That was the whole point of BuzzFeed.
Right. How about you, Jim?
I struggle with the word audience. Andrew and I were in a conversation last night about this, and I use it all the time because I find it's easy to talk within our news organization about this audience. because it at least helps us focus our thinking and focus our planning. But since our goal, as most journalists or media organizations' goal, is to increase audience, I think that even using it as a singular monolithic word doesn't quite cover it, because I want our audience to get bigger. I want to find new audiences and new ways of reaching different people. That, to me, is how we will grow, how we will succeed. So I guess I spend less time trying to figure out what our audience wants and more time trying to figure out how I can build an audience, if that makes sense.
Right.
It's still a matter of trying to find those things that people are interested in and trying to create story frameworks that move people and that people will stick with. I mean, you talk about how much time are people spending. We spend a lot of time thinking about that, looking at those metrics. The more time that I can keep someone on a page, well, the more I feel like I'm doing my job better. I think that's a huge thing and a great indicator of how successful you can be. I don't think, and this is a luxury we have, maybe journalists at the Wall Street Journal would feel differently, I don't feel like we need to do specific things. I mean, there are certain types of stories or events that I think we need to cover in a certain way. I think there are some expectations about how we do things, but we're not going to determine what our audience needs.
Well, the idea of building an audience ties closely to the idea of building a brand. And you all, even Twitter, are building next generation brands. When Fortune came of age during the 20th century, building an iconic brand was very much dependent on the type of media structure we had that supported it. What does it even mean to build a brand in 2014, and how do you do that differently than you might have 20 years ago?
The fascinating thing that we've seen, and I feel like LinkedIn represents this as well, is this sort of disaggregation of the individual journalist from the brand that they represent. There was a time not too long ago that the New York Times was the only brand that you were really paying attention to. But now it's very much on Twitter. You can be following David Carr, who is an absolutely fantastic journalist who happens to work for the New York Times, but he could be your primary relationship with the paper. And instead of you are a subscriber or a digital subscriber or a frequent visitor to the website. And I think that this is a interesting new trend, and so we see journalists spend a lot of time working on building a following. We talk with editors who talk about, we absolutely consider who has the larger Twitter following when we're trying to decide who to hire, because that's potentially that can help us drive more traffic back to our site.
It can also tell you who's tweeting all day and not working.
Also, that's right. Yeah. That's another thing to be careful of. Future editors.
Tweeting and not working, but what if tweeting is working?
That's true. That is the thing. Today, Ben Smith told me, my boss, editor-in-chief, that today was one of his favorite Twitter days he's had in a while, because on Twitter, when there's small political things happening, there are things you wouldn't write a news story about, but you can tweet about.
Right. Right.
I would agree totally about this idea of building your own brand. And there are certain publications that are still against the star culture. The idea is the brand is what's important. But I don't think that is a feasible way to build a career anymore. That if you're as a journalist, that I think you've got to be out there on your own, and your reputation is based on what you write anyways. It's not, if you write something that's bad, you're going to be hung out to dry. And that was always the case. Now it is even more true. And if you write something great, you're going to be rewarded for it. And you want to write stuff that's different. You don't want to write commodity news. You have to actually say things that are interesting. You've got to find incredible data. You've got to tell stories a great way, and you will be rewarded for it now because you can be out there on your own. That doesn't mean don't work at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and all these great iconic brands, but it means build your own brand while you're there.
So if that's the case, how does Jim build Mashable around all of these mini brandlets?
First off, I do agree. I think you have to, as a media company, personal brands are really, really important. And I think they redound to the benefit of the bigger brand. It will happen. People will. Andrew knows that where David Carr works. Consumers are smart. They are going to know where those journalists hang out. They are going to know where those journalists are published. They will click those articles. They will click links, and they will be taken back to those publications. So I do find it interesting. That discomfort that Dan mentioned is there. There are media companies, large and small, digital and otherwise, that are still struggling with this. Oh, if their personas get too big, they'll go off and do TV, or they'll whatever. I know that fear exists, but I think it's like we've got to get over it, and we've got to take advantage of it, because I do think it can help build your overall brand. One other thing, I want to go back to the platform thing again, because I think it is one of the struggles when you think about branding, is how it's a tricky thing that I'm still trying to figure out. How, if you do exploit brands again like Twitter or Facebook, where you're pushing your content onto other platforms, how do you maintain your own individual brand? I think that's an equally important question these days too.
Right. I want to move us to question and answer. Do we have a sacrificial first question asker? They'll make me call on my former students, because I will. You know where you are.
Hi,
Give us your name.
my name is Rachel, and I go to SPI. So there is a whole controversy going on called net neutrality. And you guys are on huge websites. I used to be on the computer for like 9-10 hours a day because I used to be a web designer. So I use your websites all the time. So since you guys are in the industry, I'd like to know your thoughts on this whole net neutrality thing.
Net neutrality is, to my mind, one of the most confusing words. It is so confusing that we at Fortune have a joke that nobody's allowed to write about it because no one will read the story. It's sort of like a dead-in-the-water word. But what it gets to is the internet arrives at your computer through pipes, and the question is whether or not somebody should get to control the speed of the data on your pipes, and who gets to send you data fast, and who gets to send you data not as fast. So what do you guys think?
I think it's interesting. I mean, we've been kind of covering the activism around net neutrality because, one of the things that we covered is the internet. And as for, personal thoughts on net neutrality,
One of the things that you cover subject-wise from a business
yeah,
perspective.
absolutely.
Sure.
I mean, that's it is a thing that we cover because I think
Serious investigative coverage. That's an area for you guys.
yeah, but and this kind of goes into our what we call forward, our tech section. So they've written about it a bit particularly in terms of the activism around it, which is I think the most interesting thing to me is people are really active, even though everybody who's not interested in it finds it really boring and is not active in it.
Should private companies be able to have a faster lane on the highway of the internet?
Well, I'll take a stand. I don't know if what I say represents the opinion of my publisher, but no, I feel pretty doctrinaire about it. I followed it, and it is an incredibly complicated, incredibly important. I don't consider it that boring, but I may be different. I find it really strange how the FCC seems to be trying to have it both ways. On the one hand, they want to say that they're going to keep the internet open, yet they're going to figure out a way to allow companies to pay for that access. Netflix is and will continue to pay for faster access, even though the FCC seems to be trying to say, well, it will keep the internet open. I don't know. I'll go ahead and take a stand. I'll be very doctrinaire. I think it should be open. I don't think that. I think it should be seen as a utility, and I think that there should be free and open and equal access to everyone and every company.
I was gonna say similarly to Jim. I do think that there's a strong case to be made for the internet being regulated as a utility because it's such an important part of so many people's lives.
Unless either of you disagree, we'll move on to our next question.
Hi, I'm Caroline, former SPI student and currently at Travel and Leisure. as more media companies experiment with sponsored content, native advertising, advertorial, whatever you want to call it. Do you all have an opinion on how that type of content should be pushed out to audiences via social media? Whether it needs to be, hashtag sponsored or come from a different account altogether.
Thank you, Caroline.
So I think it absolutely depends on the organization. Sort of, this is all of these experiments with kind of native content where you are employing people who are potentially trained as journalists to produce content that has a direct revenue connection back to a sponsor, and which is quite possibly the blurriest of the line between business and editorial has ever gotten. It is all of this stuff it's highly experimental and super new, and I think it's for every organization, it's setting new ethical rules around this stuff and figuring out what works for the organization. We've seen both from the Twitter side, posts pushed from the main account that include a hashtag that say that it's sponsored. That's something, of course, that an advertiser wants because your main handle is going to have a wider reach. We've seen the other, which is the these are our sponsored posts. That's how we're distributing them. It's a harder sell to your advertisers because they're like, well, no one follows that. That's just your sponsored content feed. And I think wrestling with these kinds of questions, right there, that's where the future of the industry is going. Like trying to figure that stuff out. I think that's the important work that's being done right now. I
think you have to market as sponsored. I don't think that you can push it out without having some way to point out that this is sponsored content. I think transparency is always the best policy. But I mean, what I would hope is that before any deal gets done, this is all worked out well ahead of time and inked, and everyone understands exactly what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. And then I think it's incumbent on the brand itself to be the one pushing it out. I would try to push as much of that as possible back on the brand and say, hey, IBM or Cisco or whoever, travel, Delta, it's up to you to actually get eyeballs onto this as well. And so what's your media plan around it?
And we actually, at Twitter, we have a program that we work in complement with media companies, most often television broadcasters, but also a couple of print organizations, which is called Amplify. And it's sort of to solve this question of you have a sponsor and you have a social platform and you have a media company. How do you make all that stuff work together and everyone still feels clean at the end of the day? And the way that works is it's exactly this. It is you have a piece of content, which is the content, and then you have the advertisement in front of it, which is the ad in front of it. Talking about video here, which is the people tend to know the difference between the ad and the piece of content. And then it's actually the brand Delta or GM who is paying to spread that content widely on social.
Thanks. Thank you, Caroline. Any other questions? Okay, right here.
I have a question.
And can we get your name?
Oh, my name is Kayla. I'm interested in hearing something a little bit more imaginative. We've talked about, or you all have talked about, how what's popular today and what works today won't necessarily work tomorrow. As we know, technology has a really fast turnaround. It develops very quickly, and I was interested in knowing what you think is next. What's the next Instagram or the next Snapchat or the next Vine? What do you think is coming up in media? That's
Messaging
exciting.
apps.
Messaging apps.
Yeah, that's the thing that we're thinking about a lot now. I mean, they're not sending traffic quite yet, but you've got WhatsApp and Kik and all of these messaging apps that I think that have millions and millions and millions of users.
And if you already look at what's going on in China, you can see that there are media companies being built on top of these messaging apps. WeChat has a number of media companies that you can only find them on WeChat. The WeChat that we have here is a very different version than they have in China, but this idea of getting on a messaging site and of following not just a publisher that lives on WeChat, but also the writers who also on WeChat, have that push to your device. And that's got to be a major part of how the media looks in a few years.
To that point, I feel like from my perspective at Twitter, I spent a lot of time working with people around storytelling on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And I'm fascinated with the idea of Twitter as a primary reporting platform. So the first place that you're sharing news, BuzzFeed reporters are often really good about this. I'm really interested in sort of further down the line, or in China, which is another way of saying further down the line, the idea of media companies that are built on these platforms. Twitter's executives have long described it as a medium, like television is a medium or print is a medium. What are the news organizations that are native to these platforms, these new ways of broadcasting?
Jim, you want to throw in on this one?
No, not necessarily. I can't disagree with the messaging apps. That to me, I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's a real challenge to figure out how you fit into those conversations. I think that's I certainly haven't figured it out, whether you guys have or not.
Not telling.
Yeah, that's the opportunity.
And BuzzFeed does some interesting things. You guys are affiliated with Now This News. Now This News was very early to Snapchat. What does content look like on these apps when you do experiment with it?
What do you mean?
Well, so Now This News, which is a video news service for millennials that has a relationship with BuzzFeed, so you publish a lot of their content, was actually publishing videos on Snapchat. And those videos were even shorter than the videos online, which is hard to do because they're short. So I'm just curious, when you're thinking about these apps, like what could content look like? Kayla said imaginative. Let's imagine a second.
I really don't know. It's funny. A few weeks ago, our social guru, this guy Samir Mizrahi, decided he would tweet from BuzzFeed's Twitter and ask people to send him snaps, send us Snapchats. And then he proceeded to tweet screen grabs of the Snapchats that people were sending him. And it was really fun and people really enjoyed it, but it also didn't do anything for BuzzFeed to do that. So, I think we're experimenting with this stuff, but it's also kind of well, what's the point? I don't know.
One other thing that does interest me, I don't know if this will give you the new inspiration you're really looking for. Everybody, I'm sure, sees the charts of mobile use doing this, and desktop and laptop and what have you doing this. I think a huge challenge is how to take the bigger, more complicated stories and render them in a way that is not just consumable on mobile, because I can read a 4,000-word article on mobile and kind of enjoy it. But are there ways to use the inherent flexibility of a phone to read in a different way, to read or consume in a different way? I don't know if you guys are familiar with the app Stellar, which is a kind of a cool storytelling app where basically it's you can build stories out of images and words that overlay or connect to those images, and it's just a very simple, swipeable way of consuming information, consuming stories. So, whether it's within a publisher's own app or something that could fit into another ecosystem, I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential exploration there, and a way to tell a little bit more elaborate stories than you would otherwise be able to tell with a few seconds of Vine or 140 characters.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Any other questions from our audience? Okay, right here. Go for it.
JK. Hi, my name is Angeli, and I'm with SPI. And I just wanted to ask, so we know that Google and Facebook are starting to hyper-personalize advertisements for users. Do you think that might be something that you guys might be trying to do, or do you want to stay away from narrowing your content?
So the question is a question about the future of hyper-personalization, and you are noting that you are seeing it on Google and Facebook.
Yeah.
So where's the opportunity for you with hyper-personalization, and where are the challenges, especially perhaps around privacy?
Are you talking about ads, or are you talking about for content?
Can content start to do it?
Right.
On our app, you can select the kinds of content that you want more of or less of. If you just want politics, you can just get politics. We also kind of had a experimental widget on the site where you could kind of dial up things or dial things down. And so that was one way of doing it, but that was self-selecting in terms of what people are, what they want.
I think you'll see there are some publishers who have started with the idea of changing the content on their site for if you're coming from LinkedIn or if you're coming from Twitter, you can say this is what people who are on Twitter like to read, this is what people who are on LinkedIn like to read. And so everything that you're served is different because you're coming from this social network, and so we think that you're this kind of a reader. I think that's going to continue. You're going to keep getting more and more of this narrower the content that's based on where you're coming from, because that's some data that you can use to give you a little bit more information. But I think this whole concept of I think that we all think, I'd like to think that we probably all think about the idea of the filter bubble, of what happens when you do start serving people what you think they want or what they tell you they want, and their world gets so small that all they're seeing is that they're missing the rest of the world, and they're missing the great serendipitous article that they should have seen, they may have seen, that would have taken them in a whole different direction. You know, the same kind of thing you get from when you open the newspaper and you see a story that you never would have read before. You know, I think we all still want to capture that idea in a digital format. So even as the filter bubble tightens, I think you'll still see every one of us trying to figure out ways to pop it and to bring in non stories that don't seem just perfect for you.
Thank you very much. We have time for one last question. Allison?
Hi. So we're seeing technology advance to become more integrated in all of our lives in kind of crazy ways. You've got Google Glass, self-driving cars, drones. There's just computers everywhere. That's what's coming. Have any of your companies even begun to anticipate how your platforms might interact with those devices, or how you can, how you can adapt with technology becoming so integrated into all of our lives?
If we don't have to drive our cars, that's going to be a lot more reading time sitting in front of a screen.
That's a great point.
We got a drone.
What are you guys doing with it?
Well, we got a couple actually. We're experimenting. We're playing around with it and trying not to get arrested. So.
Twitter's actually available on Google Glass. We had some engineers, I think for a Hack Week, put together an app that's like inside of Google Glass. You can see like one tweet at a time cross in front of your eyes.
Can you tweet from it? Can you tweet from your Google Glass?
I believe so. I think you can I don't know. I wore it one time.
You can tweet pictures,
There you go.
essentially. Yeah. I don't think you can tweet words yet, but won't be long.
All right.
But in answer to your question, we have to. I mean, the answer is people will want to consume information wherever they are and on whatever device they're either using, putting on their arm, putting on their eyes, or driving. So we would be crazy not to be thinking about how we fit within those worlds.
And that's a wonderful note to end it on. It's the future of media, thinking about the future of media. Thank you very much to our panelists. And with that, we'll cut it.
Thank you all for coming to this really, I think, very exciting media talk, and we will look forward to seeing you in the next room. Thank you very much, and a second round of applause for Jesse and our panelists. Thank you.